Let's get started. Y'all ready? Let's start with the Department of Banking and Finance. Members, we are on page 9 of the tracking sheets that are coming around. Oh, I just don't have one. All right. Mr. Hagler, we are on page 9 of the tracking sheet, and go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Just I may go a little bit out of order, but just by way of a background, we regulate 159 banks, 53 credit unions, and we're the 4th largest banking department in the country. Also, to give it some relevance, the Federal Reserve, located on 10th Street here, covers 6 states with only 44 banks. For us, regulating banks largely means examining banks. There's no college degree in bank examining, so we're really hiring folks with business degrees, economics, finance, accounting, and then we spend a lot of time training them, getting them up to speed. It typically takes about 3 years to get them up to the financial examiner position, and usually about 5 years to get them to the senior position. That's where they know how to do most of the job and start to be able to handle the more complex and troubled institutions if necessary. And our banks are getting more complex every day. The recession, our workload grew exponentially, and we also had staff declines at the same time due to budget constraints. In 2013, 2014, we really hit a crisis with turnover due to the burnout, and we had a large bubble of retirements as the 30-year employees and the 34-year employees kind of overlapped with the new and old retirement systems. By comparison, a lot of folks talk about having that barbell effect. Well, in the department, senior staff, which several members are here with me today, we're all in that 18 or 19 years of service. So we've kind of gone beyond that piece of it. For us, the financial examiners and the senior financial examiners are the pivotal workforce component for us. Again, those are the folks that are trained, that are on the ground in the banks doing the examinations. They're the ones that know how to serve as the examiner in charge when they go out. They also train the newest employees that come in. They're also they're the succession planning for us as we move them up into management and senior management. If we have a breakdown in high turnover in that area, it really falls apart for us as a business continuity cycle. The other part is that we get complaints from the industry if we have too much turnover like that, because again, we're sending in folks that aren't fully trained and they're having to train them. Also, with our federal counterparts, and we always have one, it's supposed to be a 50-50 mix. It's supposed to be a healthy amount of tension between state and federal levels, kind of keep each other honest. We bring the local state perspective and we push for what's right for Georgia. They bring the national perspective, the idea of kind of what's going on a national scale. I think both points of view are good, but if we're not there and we're not advocating for what's right in Georgia, then suddenly what's good for New York and what's good for California might be what's pushed upon us here in Georgia. I say all that as a background into our fiscal year 2015 budget. This committee was gracious enough to allow us $184,000 of additional monies to raise those salaries from up to $50,000 and $60,000 respectively. At that point, we had 14 financial examiners and 4 senior financial examiners, and our turnover ratio was over 30%. So we're churning through. That helped immensely. It was great from a morale standpoint and stabilization. In fiscal year 2016, we had no change. Turnover dropped down to 22%. We had promotions of 5 financial examiners and 1 senior financial examiner. And because we still had some of those 30 and 34-year retirements and some turnover, we were able to absorb the cost for promoting those folks into those job classes. Fast forward to now and coming up with the 2017 budget, item 14-2-5 is the $288,000 for employee retention. Turnover has now dropped to 7%. That's a little overstated because we're not through a full year, but our goal is 10%, and we feel very confident that we're in the ballpark. We anticipate 16 promotions into the financial examiner and senior financial examiner positions in 2017, And as I mentioned before, we've kind of run out of those retirements, and the churn that we have is really more at the lowest level. So we don't have those high salaries rolling off and hiring in people with entry level. So that's why we need a little bit of addition to get through. That said, I think we've gotten that bubble of examiners into those job classes, and that's our goal, is to have all the examiners in the financial examiner senior positions. So I don't think I'm going to be back next year and the year after that asking for additional monies. I think it starts to stabilize at that point. I can promise you that that's money extremely well spent, because by the time we've got 3 to 5 years with them, we've got a considerable amount of just time and energy and funds in terms of training invested in them. So just a little more money to retain them is a huge benefit. We get a lot of return on that. We're still, considerably less than what the federal government pays, and we're still maybe a little bit behind some of the other states. But we don't compete purely on salary. We compete on quality of life and life-work balance. And I think getting the salaries close enough helps us bridge that gap. So that's why I'm asking for that $288,000 to help us keep those salaries, keep being able to provide that salary to people that are promoting into those positions. The other big item for us relates to an IT project. Again, some background. We currently use a system called Paradox, which is an antiquated database that I think came free with the WordPerfect suite of Office. Not Word, but WordPerfect. Yeah, it's been around a long time. In fact, when we look back at our strategic planning historically, I think it was our #1 item to address updating because it was so out of date in 2004. Of course, by the time before we could get started with that, we went into the recession, and so we haven't even mentioned it. But we knew we had a problem, but we reached out to OPB, and they suggested that we get in touch with GTA. And those folks came and sat down with us and went through everything, and they have been phenomenal to work with. I think they were a little scared when they saw kind of how out of date it was. The main thing that I took away from their visit was that product is really at end of life. It's in bad shape. I think, and not a computer geek completely, but I think it operates on a 32-bit system, and so that limits us to Windows Server 2008. So we can't even update to Server 12. So we're kind of stuck, and that is holding everything else down, so we can't expand there, which I think creates a major cybersecurity risk. Current protocol is 64-bit. Also, when you export information out of Paradox, it's in an Excel format. That Excel format is so out of date that current Excel can barely go back to convert it. So we're afraid one more update on Excel, and we will lose the ability to export our data completely. Yeah, really, we're just so overloaded, and it's problematic. Honestly, the staff spends a lot of time doing workarounds, just trying to get basic information together for me and for committee meetings and such. GTS suggested a hosted solution. We visited with banking department in Louisiana and the banking department in Kansas, because they both were using a couple of the products that were narrowed down for our application. They were very gracious hosts. They gave us a list of all the problems they had, what went right, what went wrong, what they would do better. So we've got a great idea as to how we want to go about it. The cost for that project is going to be part of a bond issue of $2.5 million, which I'm not sure if that's under the purview of this committee, but the reason I mention that is that takes us into items 14.1.6 of $212,000 and 14.1.7 of $23,000. These are key to the bond issuance. The bond is the biggest piece, but I can't utilize it if I don't have these items that go with it. And what they're really doing is allowing us the ongoing cost of a business analyst, as well as someone for desktop support. The business analyst really would be kind of an internal project manager as we go through the conversion, and then later would become more of what you traditionally think of as a business manager, as a go-between between our business line and our IT folks. Okay. The desktop support is because our security information officer currently does information security as well as desktop support, and we need all her effort to be focused on a conversion as well as the security aspect of it. Again, cybersecurity being a major piece. The $23,000 increase in telecommunication expense is related to the fact that we would be going from a in-house program to a hosted environment, and so we need to pick up the speed and communication abilities that'll go back and forth. So again, those are the big items for us in here. Everything else is basically a pass-through, or it's part of the 3% increases that's been proposed by the governor's office, which, by the way, would also be extremely helpful to us. So that would take our overall budget to $12,700,000, but I just wanted to mention that that's still well within our revenue stream of $20 to $21 million from bank assessments and fee collection. I'll pause there and answer any questions that you might have.
Go ahead. I thought.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand a little bit more about how your department runs.
Okay.
How many examiners do you have?
61.
61. Do they all live in Metro Atlanta? Have you got them living and scattered and working all through the state?
Great question. We have 4 field offices that they operate from. One is in Woodstock, one's in Loganville, one is in Dublin, and one is in Tifton.
Good. Okay.
And some of the folks that operate in the Dublin office actually live and work out of Savannah.
Yeah. I was just wondering about the retention. Quality of life would probably be a lot better in some of our rural lower part of the state.
Yeah, we have a hard time convincing them to come to Atlanta to take our main office jobs, definitely.
How often, what's the schedule of examining a bank? And I was also intrigued by how you and the feds split up a little bit what you do.
Absolutely. The schedule is anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. You typically start with a 1-year cycle. If a bank is well run and below $500 million, and I think that's now moved up to $1 billion in total assets, then we can expand that out to 18 months, and we do whenever possible. If a bank is in troubled status, then that really shortens. They're not eligible for the 18-month, and really they get shortened down to the 6-month, though it's really an exam and a visit, an exam and a visit. In an ideal world, our banks would either be on a 12-month or 18-month cycle, and we would alternate with our federal counterparts. Mm-hmm. Out of 159 banks, 156 of them are non-members, so it'd be us and the FDIC. Right. The other 3 are Fed members, so it'd be us and the Federal Reserve taking turns. And okay. It's very similar for credit unions also.
And y'all you don't charge a fee to those banks to do the examination?
We charge an annual assessment.
How much is that?
It depends on
the size of the bank.
Yeah. So we don't nickel and dime them. We don't bill by the hour unless it's like we do have one trust company that's not attached to a bank, and we have to bill it by the hour.
So that money flows into your or flows straight to the
flows
state?
Straight through us to Treasury.
Okay.
Yeah. So
do you know how much that amounts to?
Throughout the recession, we were basically net of our expenses providing $8 million a year to the Treasury.
Okay.
So our budget's only about $12 million, and we produce $21 million a year.
That's what I want to know. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned the pay for the state employees is not quite what it is for the national employees.
Correct.
The salaries, I should say, for your employees. Do you know the average for both? A rough figure will be great.
The most general comment I would say is they're paid about 50% more than my employees are at any given level. They have some examiners in the field that make more than I do as commissioner of the banking department. I think they average somewhere around the 100,000, 120,000 range, and our folks, again, they'll either be 50 or 60. If they've been around for a while, then they may be up 70 or so if they've been on with us a number of years.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Chairman, welcome.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't there on time.
That's okay. I know, we're back to back today. Well, okay. It looks like you did a fantastic job.
I hope I was convincing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the consideration.
All right, next up we have the Department of Driver Services. Come on up, Rob. And this is section 15 in your tracking sheet, on your tracking sheet.
All right. Good afternoon. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having us. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak about the budget again, and thank you and Representative Dickey again for coming to see our Atlanta office. I can't begin to tell you how much of a highlight that's been for us. Real quick, I'm going to try to just skip down, with your permission, Madam Chair, to 21.2.4. Yes, sir. That's the real gist of the ad. The other ads are administrative, and then plus the 3%. And if any discussion on that, I'd be glad to do it. But what the main crux I would suggest would be the 2 full-time and 2 part-time in the Fayetteville office. And our little handout hopefully explains a little bit of that. But if you remember the picture we talked about last year, and it is in the handout, you see on one page the new building, and the contract has been signed on that. We haven't moved in yet. We did put, where it says Department of Driver Services at the top, that we added that just to kind of give an idea of how that would look. I believe that's on page 3. And then we have the old building down at the bottom corner, just as a reminder if you're not familiar with it. But that's the new building we'll be going into that's just down the street from the current space. In the current space, the current office does about the same volume as other offices that we have, but they currently have 4 counters, and they're doing volume of places that have more or less 8 or maybe a couple more in some circumstances. So the idea is to move over just a few miles down the road, bigger office, have everything in place for that, hoping to open that at the late spring or early summer, and then to have 2 more full-time and 2 more part-time to keep the staffing up. And then the breakdown on that basically is the full-time folks are, I'm just going to call it $74,000 to make it easy for me at least. And then the part-time folks, they are loaded, they're at $10.65 an hour, and I should be calling them hourly, not part-time. And that puts them at, let's just call it $16,000 each annually at 29 hours a week. And that math basically comes up to 104 to 106. So that's what we're trying to do there, is just keep up with the heavy volume that we have in Fayetteville. That's really the gist of it, but I'll be glad to talk more about this or anything else at your pleasure.
Any questions? We need to give y'all a few minutes. What do you think? Certainly. Chairman.
Probably have asked, I imagine maybe you've been asked this, about this in the amended budget process, but I'm trying to recollect that, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I am, but that Joshua's Law money that comes in, isn't that administered through Driver Services?
You're not mistaken. It was historically, but it is now run through the Governor's Office of Highway Safety.
Okay. Yeah, that's it then.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Did a fine job.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having us and hearing from us. Thank you.
All right, members. That was our last agency for the day. Appreciate your attendance, and we're adjourned.